So here we have my limbs. We keep them in pockets like this to stop them from getting scratched or damaged in my back. You'll also notice that both the limbs curve outwards, hence the name of the bow, the recurve bow. Due to the lower limb being slightly stronger than the upper limb, it's important that we fit them both the right way around. So how do we tell which limb is which? On bows like mine, the only way is to use the label at the end of the limb, which should state the length of the bow, the poundage, and if it's the upper or the lower. This is the lower limb. The upper limb looks similar to the lower limb, but will be slightly weaker to make up for the bow's high centre of mass. This is the riser, sometimes known as the handle, which is like the body of the bow. They usually come in two lengths, 23 inches and 25 inches, and vary in price, with plastic and fiberglass usually being used for beginners, wooden being more traditional and generally used by Berber archers, and magnesium, alloy, aluminium and carbon being more expensive. Despite the expense, carbon is preferred by most archers, as it is lightweight and tends to be stiffer, meaning that it keeps the bow in alignment better than other. As you can see here, my riser is made of aluminium. This part of the riser is known as the grip. Yet again, they can be made out of different materials such as wood and various types of plastic. My arrow rest is made of plastic. It can be easily replaced by peeling it off and sticking a new one on. Much like risers, they have to be specifically bought for either left-handers or right-handers. Arrow rests can also be made out of different materials such as metal, like this one. A pressure button is also used by most recurve archers, as it can be adjusted to push the arrow further left or right in order to compensate for the archer's paradox. A clicker is used to regulate an archer's draw length and ensures that the same poundage is behind the arrow in every shot. Once the draw length is reached, the blade slides off and makes a clicking sound. Upon hearing this sound, the archer should be prompted to release the string. Also on the riser is a hole for a stabilising system, which we'll talk more about later. My bow has something known as ILF, or International Limb Fitting, which is a system designed so only ILF limbs fit into risers that are compatible with them. As you can see here, the limbs slide onto the riser easily and will be held in place using nothing more than the tension of the string on the bow. One of the other types of limbs are bolt-on limbs, however these are generally less preferred as ILF are more tunable and you can tune the tiller and adjust the limb weight slightly. Bolt-ons are also manufacturer specific as opposed to ILF, which are universal and also widely available. As you can probably tell, ILF limbs are also more convenient to put on the riser, as bolt-on limbs take more time and effort to screw on. So our next step is now to string the bow. In the centre of the string there is a serving, which can be made out of various types of serving thread, looped around the string to give it thickness. The thickness of the serving makes it more durable and also gives the knocking points something to grip onto. These are the knocking points. Although mine are made of thread to ensure no extra weight is added to the string, you can also get ones made of brass, but these are generally not recommended. So onto the string itself. My string is made of Dacron thread, but other materials can also be used to make them. Different strings can come with different amounts of twists in them. More strands make the string heavier, which can make the bow work slower but can potentially make the arrow fly faster. Although even more twists can slow it down because the limbs not only have to move the arrow, but also the increased mass of strings. Strings come in different lengths and are bought depending on the length of the bow. At the end of the string you'll notice that there are two loops which clearly vary in size. When stringing the bow, the bigger loop goes over the top of the upper limb and slides part way down the limb. The smaller loop is positioned directly in the groove at the end of the lower limb. This is a bowstringer. Mine has a small pocket and a large pocket, although some bowstringers have a large loop instead of a small pocket. To string the bow, we place the big pocket over the string that is placed in the groove of the lower limb, like this. Then we place the small pocket over the end of the upper limb. If the stringer has a loop instead of a small pocket, we slide it over the limb and past the place where the large loop sits. So to recap, slide the large loop part way down the upper limb. Then position the small loop in the groove at the bottom of the lower limb. Then put the small pocket on the upper limb and the larger pocket over the string on the lower limb. Now place 2 feet over the stringer and with one hand pull up on the riser. With the other hand place the large loop into the groove on the upper limb and slowly release the tension on the bow. Now you can take the stringer off the bow. The bow is also de-strung in the same manner. There should also be a small indent on the back of the limbs. Make sure the string is sitting in this indent. This is a sight. It's what a freestyle archer uses to aim. It consists of an extendable bar with a vertical bar that has a scale on it for reference. The sight pin is positioned on the sight block, which can be adjusted both vertically and horizontally. The sight pin should be in focus whilst the archer is aiming, and the goal should be more of a blurred image in the background. The sight is inserted into the sight block and then screwed in at your chosen setting. This is what the sight should look like when it's assembled in the correct position. This is a long rod which is used to decrease the vibrations in the bow as the arrow leaves. It's usually made of a carbon/aluminium bar with a weight and a rubber damping ball on the end. The long rod screws into the threaded hole on the end of the riser that we briefly visited earlier. The long rod could also be part of a stabilizing system like this one, which would have V-bars and side rods that will help balance the bow horizontally. And finally, here is my setup bow. So now we'll move on to the arrows. Most arrows are made up of 4 components. Towards the end of the arrow there are 3 fletchers, 1 index fletcher which is a different colour and 2 flight fletchers. A plastic nock at the back of the arrow is designed with a groove to clip between the knocking points on the bowstring. The shaft is the hollow tube that runs down the middle of the arrow. The pile is a heavy metal point inserted into the front of the shaft and glued with hot melt. As you can probably tell by now, there are lots of different variations to the basic arrow. The length of an arrow will vary depending on the size of the archer's draw length. Piles can have different shapes depending on the arrow's purpose. Fletchers can be made of different materials and can be sized differently. Shafts can be made of materials such as aluminium, carbon alloy, wood and fiberglass. My arrows are ACCs, which are made of carbon alloys. Some archers prefer to use arrows with larger diameter shafts and bigger fletchers for indoor use, as they cut the lines better, but these are not as good for outdoors as they increase drag and decrease the arrow speed, meaning that they cannot reach longer distances. To prove this, here are my arrows compared to a couple of others. This is a full carbon arrow with smaller fletchers to cut through the air easier. This is a cheaper aluminium jazz arrow which tends to be used on weaker beginner bows. This is a thicker aluminium arrow with larger fletchers to stabilise the arrow quicker over a short distance. The top arrow is a recreational fiberglass arrow used mainly by beginners as it's cheap. This is an ACC aluminium carbon arrow. This is a typical arrow used by longbow archers with a wooden shaft with plastic fletchers, although the majority of longbow archers prefer to use traditional feathers instead of plastic fletchers. Some archers choose to use a chest guard, which keeps loose or baggy clothing from touching the string when the bow is drawn. This is a bracer, sometimes known as an arm guard. These slide onto an archer's bow arm and hold in loose clothing. They also prevent the string from contacting the archer's arm. Here we have a finger tab which provides protection for the fingers which draw the string. For a secure fit, the middle and ring fingers are placed through the holes. These two fingers are placed behind the large leather section of the tab. The index finger is placed above the slot in the leather, like so. At the top of the tab you'll notice a small metal shelf, which is used as a reference for the anchor point. This is a finger sling. The finger sling slides onto the thumb and either the index or middle finger around the bow handle. The force of the string being released sends the bow jumping forwards, and the finger sling helps to catch the bow without the archer gripping the handle, which could consequently disrupt the shot. Some archers prefer to use a wrist sling, which does the same job, but I find the finger sling gives me more control over the bow. In order to make sure equipment is not damaged and is safe to use, there are a couple of basic things that you need to check for. In regards to the arrows, you need to make sure that the shafts are not bent, the fletchings are not missing, damaged or loose, and that the piles and nocks are not damaged or broken. For bows, you need to ensure that the lamination on the limbs is not peeling. The limbs are not twisted or damaged. The arrow rests are not worn or missing. The serving is not loose or frayed, and the knocking points are positioned correctly. You also have to check that the strands on the string are not frayed, the string is not the incorrect length, and there are the right amount of twists on the string. To check this, we use something called a bracing gauge. This measures the bow's bracing height. Each bow usually comes with the manufacturer's guide for bracing height. Clip the bracing height gauge onto the string and measure from just above the pressure button. My bracing height is around 22 centimeters, which is right for my bow. An alternative way of measuring bracing height is to turn the gauge on its side and measure from the innermost point of the handle to the string. Although you can't tell on the camera, this also measured 22 centimeters. So what if your bracing height doesn't match the recommended measurement? If the bracing height is too short, remove the string and add some twists. If the bracing height is too long, remove the string and remove some twists from it. To add more or less twists, we use something called bowstring wax. We take the string off the bow and add tension, then either add or remove the twists we need. Then we run the wax over the string and wipe it down with a cloth. This can also be useful if the strands on the string are coming loose. Before we select the right bow, we need to check the archer's eye dominance. The dominant eye will be the one the archer will use to aim. The simplest method to do this is to make a small triangle out of both your hands and focus at a point in the distance looking through the triangle. Then slowly pull your hands back towards your face. The eye the triangle lands over is your dominant eye. Therefore, I am left eye dominant and I will need a left-handed bow. This is a basic guide to selecting limb weight for beginners. After completing the course, an archer can progress in limb weight as they feel fit, but we tend to start beginners off on lower poundages, as, despite their physical fitness, it is very likely that they will be using muscles they have never used before. Before selecting arrow length and bow length, we need to calculate the archer's draw length. We do this by using a plain arrow with only a nock and a shaft with measurements on it. The archer will knock the arrow and come up to full draw as usual, and then we take the measurement from the pressure button. We do this 3 times and calculate the mean of all 3 measurements. This is the archer's draw length. So as you can tell, my draw length is around 25 inches. So now we know the archer's draw length, we can calculate the arrow length and the bow length that the archer will need. The arrow length is the archer's draw length plus 2 inches to compensate for overdrawing, which could sometimes occur and be a safety hazard. So my arrow length should be 25 inches plus 2 inches, which would mean I would need approximately 27-inch arrows. An archer's bow length is draw length plus 40 inches. Therefore my bow should be 25 inches plus 40 inches, which would be approximately 65 inches. You could achieve a 66-inch bow by using short limbs with a medium riser, or using medium limbs with a short riser. My bow is actually 68 inches, but with juniors it's better to give them a slightly longer bow as they're still growing and it saves having to buy new equipment every 6 months or so. A quicker way to check that an arrow is safe to use is to get the archer to hold out their bow arm and put the other hand vertically on their chin. Then you can place the arrow horizontally from their hand on their chin to the groove between their thumb and forefinger. If there is approximately 2 inches past the thumb, the arrow is safe to use like it is here. This is our outdoor range. There are warning signs placed at all points of entry, but we are fairly lucky to have an enclosed field with only 2 gates that people can enter through. For safety reasons, there must be a suitable distance of 10 yards to the side of the shooting line, and a distance of 20 yards next to the side of the range when it's at 100 yards. This gradient must continue to the end of the range and is known as the site safety area. There must be an overshoot of at least 110 yards from the shooting line for all distances up to 60 yards, and this distance must be 150 yards for compound bows, as they are more powerful than recurve and long bows. This is why, unfortunately, we cannot accept compound archers into our club, as our overshoot does not cover the full 150 yards. This is a target. Yet again, for safety reasons, all the target stand's legs must be securely pegged into the ground to prevent it from falling or being blown over. The target stand has what is known as a boss sitting on its legs. This is a straw boss, and it too is stopped from falling by a rope that is secured to the boss and then pegged into the ground. On the front of the boss there is a paper target face. You can get varying target faces and sizes for different bows and competitions, but this is just a basic 80cm face. You can also get foam target bosses that are used more often at shorter distances, as the arrows are easier to pull out of them. This is the shooting line. An archer must have 1 foot either side of the line at all times when shooting. And 5 yards behind it we have a waiting line. This distance may be decreased to 3 yards if it's absolutely necessary, but only in an indoor range. The archer must keep all their equipment behind the waiting line when they're not shooting, and they themselves must not cross the waiting line unless they are shooting or collecting their arrows. This fence acts as our spectator line. A spectator line must be at least 10 yards behind the shooting line, and any non-archers should not cross it. The differences between an indoor and an outdoor range is that in an indoor range you do not need any side safety areas or an overshoot. Instead of an overshoot, there must be backstop netting hung loosely 2 to 3 yards behind the targets, and at least 1 yard in front of any walls with the bottom touching the floor. All nets should be gathered loosely and span more than the width of the shooting area. These nets catch any arrows that miss the target. There are also a couple of verbal commands and whistle commands that every archer is expected to know. The first verbal command is fast. Fast can be yelled by any person on the range who sees the safety issue. This may be reinforced by a number of whistle blasts in a fast succession. Upon hearing this command, all archers must stop shooting immediately and come down to the resting position by gently relaxing the power out of the bow. They must then step behind the shooting line and take all their arrows off the string. The next verbal command is come down. Come down is similar to fast but is an individual command. If a coach has spotted something they would like you to correct, they may tap you on the shoulder and say come down. The archer should then stop shooting by relaxing the tension on the string and step behind the shooting line, placing their arrows back in their quiver. There are also 2 additional whistle commands that every archer is expected to know. 1 whistle signifies that it is safe for the archers to start shooting. 3 whistles signify that it is safe for the archers to advance to the target and collect their arrows. All whistle commands should be completed by the field captain. The field captain controls the range and should be able to see the shooting line at all times. They apply the rules of shooting for range safety, provide a safety briefing. As we've already mentioned, they control shooting procedures by using whistle commands. They ensure all archers and others present on the range follow safe practice, and they check the targets after every end to ensure that they remain safe and that the range is clear of arrows. We've already talked about the roles of a field captain during a competition and even when we're just shooting at the club, so now I'll cover the roles of an archer and a judge. In a competition, archers are expected to follow proper conduct and abide by all the rules created by both Archery GB and FIFA. One of the main rules in archery competitions are that no archers can use accessories that give them an unfair advantage over their opponent. For example, recurve archers are not permitted to use telescopic sights. Archers must respect all the rules of the competitions. They must shoot ends of 3 arrows in 2 minutes or ends of 6 arrows in 4 minutes, else all remaining arrows cannot be scored. Arrows also cannot be reshot under any circumstances. There are numerous other rules that the archers must follow, but I have just chosen to include a few of the main ones. Archers are also expected to abide by basic etiquette rules. This includes not talking whilst on the shooting line, waiting until the archers either side of you have completed their shot before stepping away from the line, and paying for any equipment you have damaged, whether it be by an accidental Robin Hood arrow or on purpose. Usually on each target in a competition, there will be 4 archers, each designated a letter A, B, C or D. As demonstrated here, A and C will shoot their end, then step behind the waiting line. When all A's and C's have finished shooting, the field captain will blow their whistle and B's and D's will shoot their ends. Then all archers will go and collect their arrows together. The next end, the order will switch round, with B's and D's shooting first and A's and C's shooting second. This is known as shooting in details. On each target, the archer C is expected to score unless one of the other 3 archers volunteer, although the person scoring cannot score their own arrows. 2 of the archers, usually A and B, will pull the arrows, and the other archer will review the scores. In regards to scoring, there are also rules that archers must carry out to ensure there is no cheating. For example, no archers can touch the arrows on the target before they have been scored. Some competitions are scored with 10-zone scoring, and others are scored with 5-zone scoring. In 10-zone scoring, the inner gold is 10, the outer gold is 9, the inner red 8, the outer red 7, etc., etc. In 5-zone scoring, all of the gold would be 9, all of the red would be 7, all of blue would be 5, etc., etc. In some competitions, they can also ask you to score X's, the inner gold ring. An X still counts as a 10 when scoring, but they can be used as a decider if more than one archer gets the same score. If an arrow is touching the line between 2 values, like so, it is always scored the higher value. If an archer is unsure of an arrow's value, they should always call out the higher value and see if there's any disagreement from the other archers on their target. If there is disagreement, then they must call a judge over and the judge will have the deciding vote. As we didn't have any score sheets that were right for the competition I had to shoot, I drew up my own. A score sheet is always scored horizontally. As you can see, my final score was 166. Now we'll move on to the responsibilities of a judge in a competition. In competitions, the field captain must also be a recognised judge. Some of the main roles of a judge are to assess the range layout, control the shooting procedure, time the ends, assess line cutters, deal with bouncers, unshot arrows, and equipment failures, perform the equipment checks at the start of a competition, and also carry out the announcements and introductions before the competition begins. Before any archer begins to shoot, it is important that they complete a sufficient warm-up. After any session, it's equally as important that they cool down. The purpose of a warm-up is to increase blood flow to the muscles required for archery, to prepare the joints that we need to use for shooting, to raise the archer's body temperature if conditions are cold, and to prevent injury. This is an example of a warm-up that an archer could complete. The purpose of a cool down in archery is to clear away waste products such as lactic acid from muscles, develop and maintain flexibility in the joints, reduce the risk of injury, and increase body awareness for the archer. So first we'll cover the simplest type of recurve shooting, which is usually known as barebow or point of aim. Both barebow and freestyle share the same basic principles, but there are a few key differences, one of which being that, when shooting in the barebow style, your bow is simply made up of a riser, 2 limbs and a string, nothing more. As a barebow archer, you cannot use additional equipment such as sights or stabilizers. When learning to shoot, it's easiest to remember the shooting sequence in steps. These steps are the same for both barebow and freestyle. Step 1 is the stance and knocking the arrow. One foot should be either side of the shooting line parallel to the target. The archer should have good posture with their hips directly above their feet and their shoulders directly above their hips. They should not have an arched back. The easiest way to describe how to get a straight back is to imagine that you are pulling your belly button in, then bringing it up towards your heart. Whilst bringing it up, visibly sigh and tuck your bum in. This gives the archer good posture that provides a good base for the execution of a clean shot. Always remember when knocking an arrow to have the index fletch facing towards you. This is to ensure that, due to the angles that the fletches are placed at, the index fletch does not catch on the riser, which could consequently disrupt the shot. When knocking an arrow, placing the bow on your foot helps to keep the bow straight and stops you disturbing the other archers shooting around you. Step 2 is now to set your hands. When shooting barebow, your index, middle and ring fingers should all be placed below the arrow on the string. The string should be placed in the first groove in your fingers. You should avoid having a hook that is either too deep or too shallow. Now that we've set our hands, the next step is to prepare. Preparing involves placing a slight bit of tension on the bowstring, a balanced push and pull. The angle at which your arm is placed at should look like a continuation of the arrow. This is called the preparation line. Also in the prepare step, you should turn your head and focus on the target. The next step is to raise your bow arm to the height of your mouth and put a small balanced push and pull on the bow. Now we can draw, anchor and aim. Slowly draw the string back and anchor the index finger in the corner of your mouth. With only our dominant eye open, we use the point of the arrow to aim, hence the name, point of aim. This method is called the T-draw, as at full draw the archer's posture should resemble the letter T. The final step is to release and follow through, but we'll talk about that when we move on to freestyle shooting. Freestyle nowadays is probably the most common type of archery. The first main difference between freestyle and barebow is the equipment. Unlike in barebow, freestyle archers use things like sights, stabilizing systems, and clickers in order to shoot. A freestyle archer's stance is just the same as a barebow archer's, feet parallel to the target, hips above feet, shoulders above hips, and knocking the arrow is just the same. However, the first main difference in technique is the finger placement on the string. Yet again, we want a hook that is not too deep or too shallow, but instead of having 3 fingers below the arrow, we want the index finger above the arrow and the other 2 fingers below, ensuring that you are only gripping the string and not the arrow itself. We then prepare and raise as usual. Most archers choose to anchor under their chin, But a freestyle archer's anchor point doesn't majorly matter as long as it is consistently in the same place. Whilst an archer is drawing and anchoring, they will also aim, focusing their sight over the goal. When getting sight marks, the archer must take into consideration the weather conditions or any distant changes. For example, if the wind is blowing the arrows to the left, the archer will have to move their sight pin to the left to compensate. Or if the archer was previously shooting at 40 yards and they decide to move to 50 yards, they will have to move their sight pin lower and vice versa. Once the archer has aimed, they will slightly push out with their bow arm and bring their shoulder round. This pulls the arrow through the clicker. Upon hearing the clicker, the archer's automatic response should be to unfurl their fingers from the string. The force of the string shooting forwards should send the archer's shoulder backwards and round, creating the follow-through. The archer should maintain the follow-through position until they see the arrow hit the target in order to not disrupt the shot. The final technique point I am going to cover is hand placement on the bow handle. The bow hand should be turned outwards at an angle of 45 degrees from the riser and placed on the bone just below the thumb. This ensures that the bow hand does not begin to hurt when shooting longer competitions. When collecting your arrows, there is a specific way to do it so that there is a minimal safety risk. The archer should always approach the target from the side so that they do not walk or fall into any nocks protruding from the target. Then, placing one hand firmly against the boss, they should place the other hand at the point at which the shaft is closest to the target face. They should check to make sure nobody is behind them, then pull the arrows using their shoulders and not their elbows. When pulling carbon arrows, they should always use an arrow puller to avoid getting splinters in their fingers, which may not cause immediate damage but may almost certainly in the future.